I'm Crystal, 29. I'm standing in a small community gallery, surrounded by the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle hum of pride. My photographs are on display, a collection of moments that tell the story of my new life in Seattle. But as I look around, my mind is pulled back to a night that changed everything. It was a warm evening in San Francisco, and I'd taken my mother, Vivian, to an upscale French restaurant to celebrate her 52nd birthday. The restaurant was everything I'd hoped for: soft lighting, white tablecloths, and a menu that made my mouth water. I'd saved for months to afford this dinner, and I'd bought her a diamond bracelet that cost a small fortune. I was determined to make this night perfect. As we sat down, my mother looked around the restaurant with a critical eye. "It's nice," she said, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. I pushed a small black box across the table. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, trying to sound confident. She opened the box carefully, her manicured fingers lifting the bracelet. "Diamonds," she observed, holding them up to the light. "Nice, but not quite what I had in mind." My heart sank. I'd thought she'd love it. But as the evening went on, it became clear that nothing I did was going to be enough. She asked about my job at the small art gallery, and when I told her I'd been promoted to curator, she just nodded. "That's nice," she said, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "But when are you going to get a real job? Something that pays well and has some prestige." I tried to explain that I loved my job, that I was passionate about art and helping artists showcase their work. But she wouldn't listen. "You're wasting your potential, Crystal," she said, her voice cold and hard. "You could be so much more if you just applied yourself." I felt a lump form in my throat. I'd heard these words before, countless times. But this time, they hurt more than ever. I'd been trying so hard to make her proud, to be the daughter she wanted me to be. But it was never enough. As the waiter cleared our plates, my mother leaned forward. "You know what your problem is, Crystal? You're too afraid to take risks. You're content to stay in your little bubble, doing what's safe and comfortable. But that's not going to get you anywhere in life." I felt a flash of anger. How dare she judge me? How dare she tell me what I'm capable of? "Maybe I don't want to take risks," I said, my voice shaking. "Maybe I'm happy with my life the way it is." My mother's eyes narrowed. "Happy? You call this happy? Living in a tiny apartment, working a dead-end job, and never having any real friends? That's not a life, Crystal. That's just existing." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice cold. "I don't need to listen to this anymore." My mother didn't try to stop me. She just sat there, watching me with a cold, calculating look in her eyes.
"Fine," she said. "Leave.
But don't come crawling back to me when you realize how wrong you were." I walked out of the restaurant, my heart pounding and my eyes filled with tears. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd thought this night would be different, that we could finally have a real conversation, a moment of connection. But instead, it had turned into another argument, another reminder of how far apart we were. As I walked down the street, I felt a sense of numbness wash over me. I didn't know what to do, where to go. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to my old life. I needed to start over, to find a place where I could be myself, where I could be happy. That's when I made the decision to disappear. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I'd have to leave behind everything I knew, everyone I loved. But I also knew that it was the only way. I needed to break free from my mother's shadow, to find my own path in life. Over the next few days, I made all the necessary arrangements. I quit my job, closed my bank accounts, and sold my car. I packed my bags and left my apartment, leaving behind a note for my landlord explaining that I had to leave due to a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. I took a bus to Seattle, a city I'd always wanted to visit. It was far enough away from San Francisco that I felt safe, but close enough that I could still feel connected to the West Coast. I checked into a cheap motel and started looking for a job. It wasn't easy. I had no references, no connections, and no real skills. But I was determined to make it work. I applied for every job I could find, from waitressing to retail to administrative work. And finally, after weeks of searching, I landed a job at a small bookstore. The job wasn't much, but it was a start. I worked long hours, stocking shelves, helping customers, and organizing events. But I loved it. I loved being surrounded by books, by the smell of paper and ink. And I loved the people I worked with, the regulars who came in every day to browse the shelves and chat. As the months went by, I started to build a new life for myself. I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and I decorated it with thrift store finds and artwork from local artists. I started taking photography classes, using a secondhand camera I'd bought at a yard sale. And I made a few friends, people who accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. But even as I was building this new life, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'd see a woman with a similar build to my mother on the street, or I'd get a strange phone call with no one on the other end. I knew it was probably just my imagination, but it still made me nervous. One day, about a year after I'd arrived in Seattle, I got a call from the bookstore manager. "There's a man here asking about you," he said, his voice sounding strange. "He says he's your father." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from my father, Henry, in years. He'd always been more of a bystander in my life, a silent presence who never really stood up to my mother. But I knew that if he was here, it couldn't be good. I walked into the bookstore to find my father sitting at a table, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Crystal," he said, his voice soft. "I've been looking for you." I felt a mix of emotions wash over me: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. "Why?" I asked, my voice cold. "What do you want?" He took a deep breath. "I want to talk to you," he said. "I want to explain." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, to never see him again. But another part of me was curious.
I wanted to know what he had to say.
"Okay," I said, sitting down across from him. "Talk." He told me that after I disappeared, my mother had been furious. She'd hired a private investigator to find me, and she'd spent months searching for any trace of me. But as the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years, she'd started to realize that she'd lost me for good. And then something happened. My father had found my old journals in the attic, and as he read them, he'd started to see things from my perspective. He'd realized how much my mother's criticism had hurt me, how much it had held me back. He'd confronted my mother, tried to make her see what she'd done. But she couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge it. So he'd left. He'd filed for divorce and moved into an apartment in San Francisco. I sat there, listening to his story, feeling a mix of shock and disbelief. I never thought my father would have the courage to stand up to my mother. But it seemed that my disappearance had changed him. "I'm sorry, Crystal," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have done more. I should have protected you." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the man who had once been my father. The man who had loved me, who had tried to make me happy. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft, "for telling me." He nodded. "I just wanted you to know that you're not alone. That I'm here for you if you need me." I smiled. "I appreciate that, Dad. But I'm doing okay. I've built a new life for myself here in Seattle." He looked around the bookstore, his eyes filled with pride. "I can see that," he said. "You've done well for yourself, Crystal. I'm proud of you." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father say those words. And as I sat there, surrounded by the books and the people I'd come to love, I realized that I was finally free. Free from my mother's shadow, free from the expectations and the criticism. I was free to be myself, to live the life I wanted to live. Over the next few months, I stayed in touch with my father. We talked on the phone regularly, and he even came to visit me in Seattle a few times. He told me that my mother was still struggling, that she was having a hard time coming to terms with what had happened. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I'd spent too many years trying to please her, trying to be the daughter she wanted me to be. And in the end, it had only made me miserable. One day, my father called me and told me that my mother wanted to see me. She'd been going to therapy, he said, and she'd realized how much she'd hurt me. She wanted a chance to make things right. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no, to never see her again. But another part of me knew that I needed to face her, to finally close this chapter of my life. So I agreed to meet her. We met in a neutral location, a coffee shop in Portland. When I walked in, I saw her sitting at a table in the corner, looking older and more tired than I remembered. She stood up when she saw me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Crystal," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry." I sat down across from her. "I appreciate that, Mom. But it's going to take more than an apology to make things right." She nodded. "I know. I just want a chance to explain. To tell you how sorry I am." I listened as she told me about her childhood, about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to live up to her parents' expectations. She told me that she'd never meant to hurt me, that she just wanted me to be the best that I could be. I felt a mix of emotions wash over me: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of empathy. I knew that her childhood had been difficult, that she'd been through a lot. But that didn't excuse what she'd done to me. "I understand, Mom," I said, my voice calm. "But I need you to understand that I'm not going to let you treat me like that anymore. I'm my own person, and I'm going to live my life the way I want to live it." She nodded. "I know. And I respect that. I just want a chance to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." I thought about it for a moment. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, that there would be a lot of work to do. But I also knew that I wanted to give her a chance. "Okay," I said, my voice soft. "But we're going to take things slow. And you're going to have to prove to me that you've changed." She smiled. "Thank you, Crystal. I promise I won't let you down." As we left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I'd finally faced my mother, and I'd stood up for myself. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready for it. I was ready to start a new chapter in my life, a chapter filled with love, acceptance, and most importantly, freedom.